Welcome, everyone, to Puget Sound Estuarium's Discovery Speaker Series. My name is Clarissa Felling, and I'll be your host this evening. Discovery Speaker Series is an opportunity for you to all learn about what's happening in our community and to spark conversations. So if you have any questions at all for our speaker tonight, please feel free to type them in the Q&A below. You can either do it as soon as it comes up. You can type in your question, but we will save them till the end. You can also download and print off a coloring page to go along with today's talk. This was done by one of our volunteers, some adorable salmon. If you need to keep your hands busy while you listen in, it was a great thing to do. If you have to leave early or know someone else who would be really interested in listening to this talk, it will be posted to the Puget Sound Estuarium's YouTube channel in the next couple days. You'll also get a reminder email with the link as well. If you missed any of our previous Discovery Speaker series, you can also find those on our YouTube channel to watch. This is our last one of the 2023-2024 season, but we will be back starting in October of this year. So I'm very pleased to welcome Davy Clark for our speaker today. He is the program director at the Nisqually River Education Project. They work to provide student service learning projects that inspire stewardship of the Nisqually watershed and beyond. From tossing salmon to planting trees to everything in between, they cover the entire watershed to create a new generation of compassionate leaders. Thank you so much, Davy, for taking time out of your evening to show us what you have in store today. Whenever you're ready, you can get started.
Yeah, thanks so much, Clarissa. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to come and talk. We at the Nisqually River Education Project love the estuarium and love working with you all on multiple things that we get to do together. I'm going to jump in and just get myself situated with my screen sharing. Awesome. Yeah, this evening I'm going to be talking about the Nisqually River Education Project and the work that we do. I'm really going to highlight one of the stewardship activities that we do with students. And then as time allows, I'll probably touch on some of the other programs as well, but just kind of use one of those as a model for some of the really fun things that we get students involved in all throughout the Nisqually watershed. I'll start off by talking about basically who we are. The Nisqually River Education Project is, we get a lot done, but we're three people. It's myself, we have an awesome AmeriCorps member, Alex Zink, and then our astounding water quality program coordinator, Julia Freganera. And we are all year long in classrooms and outside with students, which we just consider a classroom without walls. Also kind of getting oriented, thinking about the work that we do with Nisqually River Education Project. It's really kind of think of like our office is the watershed. The bounds of where we work is within this watershed, and what we're doing through all of the stewardship activities that we get students engaged in, the thread always ties back, or the story of what we're doing always ties back to how can students be involved with taking action to help salmon recovery as they learn about issues that are impacting salmon. We think that the Nisqually watershed is a truly special and unique place. So I wanted to, I guess, just start with looking at this map of the watershed is one way to get oriented. One of the things that makes it special is that the river is born on Mount Rainier out of the Nisqually Glacier. It flows for about 78 miles. It passes through 3 dams along its journey down through Ashford and Elby and further down the watershed next to Joint Base Lewis McChord, and then ends in Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge. So to the best of my knowledge, it's the only watershed that starts in a national park and ends in a national wildlife refuge. So it's born in a place where it's protected, it ends in a place where it's protected. Both of those by different federal agencies, but federal agencies nonetheless. There's a really wide range of communities that make up the Nisqually watershed, and it also kind of spans all these different geographic boundaries. So parts of the watershed are in Pierce County, Thurston County, and then also Lewis County. So that's one way to think about where we're working. The other thing that I wanted to kind of look at is rather than just a map, having this kind of gigantic bird's eye view, looking more on the ground, thinking about the span of where this work is taking place with students. Some of what we do goes all the way up to Mount Rainier National Park. And here you can actually see where the river's being born on the Nisqually Glacier. The river is super rocky. It's fast right here where it's coming out of the snout of the Nisqually. And as it takes that really long 78-mile journey, the character of the river changes. As it passes through those dams, those are certainly something that impact it. It slows down, it widens, and then it eventually works its way down to that place where it ends, down at the wildlife refuge. And it's here where the river meets the sound. This river is, when we think in the grand scheme of rivers, it's this small river formed from this glacier on a mountain ending in Puget Sound, and then it takes this journey through a place that has really in the last, if we just look even in the last 50 years, a huge amount of growth and development have happened. That's led to a lot of things that we'll see the story here be the same as elsewhere. Habitat fragmentation, water quality issues. But when I keep going back to the idea that, or thinking about the fact that the Nisqually watershed is so special, the thing that I think makes it so unique and so special is that while the development and the habitat fragmentation and those issues that impact the overall health of the watershed occur, there's at the same time a really broad and incredible coalition of people that have been coming together to protect the Nisqually watershed. So what that means is that we don't just have a river that's protected at its birthplace and protected at the end, but in between those two places where the federal government is protecting this river, over 75% of the main stem is protected by groups like the Nisqually Land Trust. So these are groups that are purchasing lands along the Nisqually River, putting them into conservation status, engaging in restoration activities, and then we're working alongside them to get school kids out involved in that work. A lot of the purchase of land that I mentioned is done by the Nisqually Land Trust, is done in alignment with the Nisqually Indian Tribe's Department of Natural Resources, who act as the lead entity for salmon recovery throughout the watershed. So the end goal for a lot of this conservation is taking care of salmon. Because if there's one thing we know, it's that if we take care of salmon, we're taking care of everything else. And that group of people that make this happen, I mentioned the land trust because they own a lot of the property, but it's really a huge group that comes together under this umbrella organization called the Nisqually River Council. This is a group that was formed in 1987, and they've been meeting every single month ever since then. I really have never heard of times where they skipped a meeting. There's 28 member agencies, and this is everybody from city council members from towns in the watershed come. There's members from Joint Base Lewis McChord, from state conservation agencies like the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Nisqually Indian Tribe. For many years, the head of the Department of Natural Resources from the tribe has chaired the council. And then we as a staff at Nisqually River Education Project, our job is to really carry forward the goals of the council. This council has functioned in this unique model of being non-regulatory, but saying, what if we just have a really big table and we bring people together, and we might figure out ways to bring people to a table that's so big that normally you'd think of certain groups as not wanting to get along around conservation, and we recognize that there's actually huge amounts of common ground. So there's a big track record of in the watershed of the short way, I think, of putting it, maybe making it too blunt, is the tree huggers are sitting down with the farmers and the military, and we're all actually realizing that we want salmon to be in the rivers. And so we can all get behind that goal. Our work is done to accomplish what's called the Nisqually Watershed Stewardship Plan. And that's the guiding document of the Nisqually River Council. And when the folks way back in the 80s set up the stewardship plan, one of the things that I'm truly astounded by in looking at that plan is that they said, if we want to take care of salmon, we have to have metrics. We have to kind of assess ourselves and say, how are we doing? And you'll see in our stewardship plan that there's really typical things that one might expect. How many acres have we restored of shoreline habitat? How many trees did we plant? Let's count the salmon. How are the runs doing? But something that's really amazing to me is that directly alongside those goals is also how many students got out and did stewardship in the watershed. And so I love that in the creation of the stewardship plan, that student involvement in building community coalition was just caked right in. It wasn't added on, but it was just part of the recipe. And so that's really where mine and Julia's and Alex's work comes in. That we as the Nisqually River Education Project, our job is to engage youth in community science and service learning. And we do that. The big program I'm going to highlight is just kind of a model of what we do, is our salmon carcass tossing trips. I'll also talk a little bit about our water quality monitoring that we do that gets kids doing community science. Some unique trips that we've been doing more recently called Salmon Cedar Canoe, our Ion Nature program, another community science program. We love community science. And then some tree planting and invasive species removal. With our program, one of the things I'll also highlight is that in order to make sure that it's accessible to students throughout the watershed, we're working pretty tirelessly to make sure that these field experiences and basically taking advantage of any programming that we're offering is going to be totally free to participants. And so we're often working on grants primarily to make sure that we can make sure that we're paid. But then the other really big ticket item is making sure that when teachers want to do this program, that we can say, we're going to pay for your school bus. And we're also going to pay for your substitute teacher if that's required for you to participate. And by doing that, we just want to keep the barrier as low as possible so that if a teacher is super passionate, they don't have to worry about writing letters to their PTA or working after hours to be able to participate. We know that it's a heavy enough lift already just to organize a field trip. So we want to take care of these pieces for them. And so that's all I'll say sort of generally about our program. And I'll switch gears now to talking about our salmon tossing. And I wanted to pop up this video. This was during 2020, 2021, when we couldn't be out there with kids. And our staff are tossing salmon. They kept the program going just as a staff activity. And I think with salmon tossing, at first look, if you just saw us out there and you had no context, it looks like we're just illegally dumping. And so I want to kick off before I jump into what are we doing with kids. I kind of want to just say, like, what is salmon tossing and why are we doing it? And to think about this, we've got to start with really young fish. We think about young salmon in streams and in creeks in the Nisqually watershed, where they're born. These are creatures that are going to make incredible migratory journeys. Only a few of them out of the ones that hatch in the creeks will survive. But the story of salmon carcass tossing starts here. It starts with a young fish that goes out to the ocean and becomes huge. So that fish, when it becomes big, the most important part for our field trips doing salmon carcass tossing is that its body is made up of the ocean. That it goes out there and it's getting all of this food, eating, becoming huge, pretty much while it's out in the sound or in the ocean. When that salmon returns, it's bringing back, as it makes that migratory journey back to its spawning grounds, the body that it grew in the ocean comes back into a freshwater environment. And it brings with it all of the calories and the nutrients And after it spawns and its carcass lays there alongside the riparian forest where it spawned, it dies and its body becomes the forest. So folks have gone out doing research along these salmon-bearing waterways, and the samples, the amount of nitrogen will change, or marine-derived nitrogen will change sample to sample. You'll see numbers pretty varied. So I'm sort of just picking one that's not at an extreme either way. But in some of these forests with salmon runs, right alongside where these salmon die, 18% of the nitrogen found in those forests is marine derived. And we're talking about forests that are 100 miles away from the ocean, or in our case, in the watershed, 50 miles away from the sound. And so the question then, of course, is where did this ocean nitrogen come from? And the answer is the salmon bodies, that when they died and decomposed, that plant food, that nitrogen went into the soil and then gets taken up by the plants. So as you're walking through a forest next to somewhere where salmon die, that place has been materially shaped by those salmon carcasses over many generations. In some cases, some of the old trees that live there, folks will go in and take a core out of a 1,000-year-old cedar tree, and they can go back and look in the rings of that tree for the marine-derived nitrogen that's in the rings, and they can actually take some estimates as to what salmon populations were like, 800 years ago, based on the nitrogen that those trees soaked up. So part of why we're going out there and throwing salmon is we want to bring that nitrogen, that marine-derived nitrogen, back to these forests where historically there would have been way more salmon coming up in the streams right next to them. And as those salmon populations have declined, we're basically supplementing something that is degraded. Another reason that we're out there tossing salmon is because it's salmon being present in the river, in the streams, is part of the culture. It's part of the spiritual traditions of the Nisqually people. The salmon carcasses that we're tossing are provided by the Nisqually Indian tribe's hatcheries, the Kalama Creek and the Clear Creek hatchery, which the tribe operates. After the salmon come to those hatcheries and they're processed by the staff there, they'll actually put them into a freezer. They freeze them up. That helps make sure that there's no diseases left. And then they put them in totes for us. They loan us a truck, and that's how we get these salmon up to the areas where we toss them. And we tend to take them up to areas around the town of Eatonville. And so we're tossing around the Nisqually River and the Michelle River, which feeds into the Nisqually. We also are tossing salmon, not just because the plants depend on them, not just because it's important culturally, but because there's tons of animals that love to eat them. We might walk by and think it smells bad, but to 137 other vertebrates, they smell dinner or breakfast or lunch or whatever the case may be, or maybe all three. And so just to sort of give a sense of that, how many of those animals love these salmon, this is all 137 of them. I'll leave this up here for a moment. You can probably find at least one animal in here that you love that depends on salmon carcasses being available for them. And so for students, when they're participating in this field trip, the first thing I'll say is that oftentimes kids will show up, and these salmon carcass tossing sites that we have established are often not in, there's not a big paved parking lot. Many times we're getting a key to a gate from a city or from UW Pack Forest and opening a gate and convincing a bus driver to go down a decommissioned logging road. And the kids get off the bus and they look at their teacher, and you can kind of see in their eyes, they're thinking, where are we? What did our teacher sign us up to do? And then they hike down this old logging road, and there we are next to a truck, and there's a bunch of dead salmon on the ground. And they look at their teacher again and they think, what on earth are we doing? And it's at this point that we start to talk a little bit more about that concept of salmon as a nutrient pump and how important it is that what we're doing today isn't just an exercise, but it's actually going to have a big impact. It's going to help the trees in the area. It's going to help the wildlife. And this usually takes some convincing. We'll start off with kids who don't necessarily want to pick up these salmon carcasses. But pretty soon, I think a lot of it, it's very, I mean, basically, this is probably, I would say, the smelliest field trip any kid ever takes. Um, After they start to get used to the smell, we'll normally see them start to be okay with collecting the salmon, um, but maybe a little hesitantly, maybe holding it out pretty far from their body. And I actually should back up. I skipped a picture, but I do want to talk about it. The field trips don't always go as planned. This is an example of typically we get frozen salmon carcasses, we dump them out of the truck, and they all fall apart. Some mornings it's really, really cold. So we get there 10 minutes before the kids, and sometimes they come out in a big frozen block, and we get to work as fast as we can to break them up. Each class that comes out is going to be tossing about 300 salmon. Sometimes, if we have a big group, we do a double totes, and we'll toss about 600 fish in a day. After kids start to get used to it, we start to see more than just participation. We start to see smiles. And from those smiles, one of the things that has really stood out to me over the time that I've been involved in doing these trips is most of the trips that I have done at some point in the day, by the end, I have to stop someone from kissing the fish. Um, the kids, I think, get really into it. I truly think some of it is just that they get used to the smell of these salmon. But then the other piece is, I think, as it sets in that what they're doing is making a difference, and that they're not just learning about something, they're learning and actually getting to take action, that really gets them motivated around this project. We've been doing salmon carcass tossing for, at this point, about 20 years. And we've done, this is a little bit of a back of a napkin math, but we think that about 175 tons of salmon have been tossed by students over those 20 years. That's 350,000 pounds of fish, a little over. Um, and when you go back and start thinking about that marine derived nitrogen, that's a lot of nutrients that are put back into a forest, right? Because these are plants that can take advantage of those nutrients year after year after year. And so we're supplementing something that has been lost and trying to bring it back. It's also a chance for students to see the direct impact that this has to wildlife. During some of these salmon carcass tossing trips, really by the end of the day, we'll be hearing multiple eagles call. We've set up game cameras and seen the wildlife that comes that same evening to come and start breaking down the salmon carcasses to eat them. And so that piece, I think, also becomes really immediately evident to students when they see eagles come in during the trip. The other story I guess I'll share about this is probably in the first year of working this position and doing these trips, probably the most trouble that I got in was after we had wrapped up our salmon carcass tossing. We received an email from the commissioner of the Eatonville airport, and it had turned out that we had done a bunch of salmon carcass tossing in just a few sites. And some of that was from my inexperience. And it caused so many bald eagles to come into the area that multiple aircraft flying into that airport had to be diverted into an emergency maneuver to make sure that they didn't impact bald eagles. And obviously, we took this really seriously, and we made a plan to say, oh, we're going to spread out in the future and make sure that doesn't happen again. But one of the other sort of side lessons that I walked away with was just, it was such a reminder that this has a big impact, that by kids coming out and doing this, I mean, we really, a big enough impact that we have to be careful and cautious about that impact going forward, because what kids are doing out here makes such a big difference. And so that's our salmon carcass tossing. We typically do that in the winter, in December and January. Some of the other programs that we do are water quality monitoring. This is community science, where we have students adopt a water quality monitoring site near their school. There's over 70 sites that we have. Julia works with local parks, private landowners, land trusts to get access to areas close to students' schools where they can actually go out and they get trained up to conduct a variety of chemical tests. and they're testing the water to learn about whether or not it's healthy enough to support salmon. They do this twice a year in many cases. So they're doing fall, typically in or maybe late September, October. And then they'll also do some testing in winter. And that gives them some data to compare within a year. They're testing 5 different parameters. We talk to students about how it's not, you can't just, if you go to the doctor, they're not just going to put a stethoscope on you, listen to your heart, and say, well, your heart's beating fine, so you're completely healthy. You know, they might, at a checkup, they're going to take your temperature, they're going to hit your knee with that weird little hammer and check your reaction. They're going to take your blood pressure. And that's because the human body is a complex system. And it turns out water is a complex system too. So we've got to test it in all these different ways to do a checkup on the water. Kids have been doing this now for over 30 years. We actually post all of our data publicly. We have a water quality monitoring portal where student data has been input all over the years. And so we can really use this red flag data. We're able to look at this and say, hey, if there's an issue that pops up from student testing, we can go out as staff and confirm that. And then we can take that back to the Nisqually River Council, where the appropriate agencies are all sitting at the table to hear about it. Way back in our history, early on, the student data actually resulted in there was a property owner that had a leaking septic tank that they were unaware of that was right downstream from a student testing site. And the students were the ones that actually saw they had results that said our water's super unhealthy. And it was that that kicked off the little bit of sort of sleuthing to try to find out what was going on. And then that person was able to get their septic tank repaired. So it's just another example of how this has an impact. All the kids that do testing with us, we invite them to an event called Student Green Congress. And it's not just us in the Nisqually watershed that are doing testing. We also have our sister organizations that are doing all very similar kinds of work. South Sound Green, that's working in the green area on this map. Nisqually watershed's the blue, and then the reddish color is the Chehalis Basin Education Consortium. So we have this big area where kids are doing water quality testing, and each class that participates gets to select 8 delegates and send them to this event called Student Green Congress. So here we bring together about 400 to 450 delegates. So they're representing thousands of kids that did water quality testing. And their job is to bring their data, present on it, and then turn that data into recommended actions that they and their communities can take to better steward the watersheds. So students all come to the Evergreen State College, which we love working with them. They basically hand over their campus to us for a day. We bring them all together in the gym for a keynote, and then delegates head to what are called State of the Rivers sessions. That's where small student groups are presenting to one another. They're presenting to students that they've never met before, kids from their watershed or sometimes even outside of their watershed. And as they present about their experience water quality testing, the data they came up with, they start thinking about what that data means for those actions. And then we have State of the Rivers facilitators that are oftentimes environmental professionals that are facilitating that conversation to get students talking and get them coming up with recommended actions. Students all vote on those actions, and then we come back together at the end of the day. And out of about 30 State of the River sessions, we come up with the top 5 recommended actions that the delegates from that year have come up with. And then they're tasked with then taking that back to their communities to share. They also get to take part in super fun workshops in the afternoon that are all environmentally themed and super hands-on as well. So a very fun day for kids. A great experience for them from the science standpoint, from learning about how to take action. And for a lot of kids, I think it's just powerful to see themselves as someone on a college campus. The other trip that I'll highlight that we do, we've been doing now for the last 2 years, and we're going into our third, is called Salmon Cedar Canoe, Stewards of the Ecosystem. And this really came a lot out of the great envisioning of my predecessor, Sheila Wilson, who started thinking about all the stewardship work that Nisqually River Education Project was doing. And I think some of this came from really starting to go, well, who's defining what a steward is? And how can we fold in like all different thoughts from people around us and what a steward is? And so she started talking primarily with Hanford McLeod in the culture department up at the Nisqually Indian Tribe. And we worked really closely with our wonderful partners at North Thurston Public Schools that support getting every one of their students at every grade out for some kind of outdoor learning and outdoor field experience, and created this trip where students visit the culture center that's actually just up near where the wildlife refuge is. So up on the east side of the estuary, up a hill, there was an old farmer named Kenny Braggett who, when he passed, sold his farm to the Nisqually tribe. And since that time, the tribe has built a longhouse that now students come up to on these trips. Students spend time doing a salmon dissection. They weed the tribe's community garden that's there. They go and weed a blueberry patch to learn about reciprocity. That when we go on a field trip, we're not just going there to like learn from someone else and digest it, but that we're going to also give back. And that's part of being a steward. They actually spend time with Hanford in a canoe. Hanford's part of Canoe Family as a skipper for Canoe Journey. And so he'll get kids into a canoe and they spend time pulling with him in the canoe and hearing tribal teachings from him. And then also from a team of elders that spend time cedar weaving with students. And so tribal teachings are shared during that. Students are going through many different stations. They actually select what they want to do. Not everyone does every activity. So then kids can go back and they can teach each other about their experience because it was all slightly different while we're up there. We get kids out in the spring on a community science trip that takes place at the wildlife refuge called Ion Nature. I've had tons of fun doing this over many years. Clarissa has done this before. We love incorporating as many community members as possible in this program. We get kids out participating in wildlife watching, primarily bird watching because it's a migratory bird refuge. And they're recording data about what they observe. And they also participate in an ethnobotany walk where they're really teaching each other about native plants and many of their traditional uses. These trips are a great way to get younger students involved in community science. And we take student data and upload anything that's a bird that we see gets uploaded to eBird. I take every opportunity I can to promote eBird. To my knowledge, it's the largest biodiversity database ever created. And student data, community people that are just seeing birds in their backyard, ornithologists are actually going out, sometimes just uploading data to eBird as well. All of this gets compiled, and that big data helps researchers answer really big questions about these especially migratory birds. So just an example, we're running these little field trips. We do 14 of them a year. Little data points come up. An example of a bird that we might see would be this western tanager during these trips. And then all that data that gets compiled alongside, I think at this point, I don't remember. I know that it's over 1 billion bird observations have been submitted. But I don't remember if it's multiple billions or not. Over 1 billion, I'll stay with a safe number. Those get compiled and can make some pretty incredible data visualization tools like this. We're going to start with the relative abundance. So the more purple we get, the more birds, more western tanagers in that area, the more yellow, the less. And we're going to move across time as we play this video. And this will just show us the migration of that western tanager. And with all those data points, there's really a lot of fidelity to seeing exactly when and where these birds are, what kinds of habitats they're using. And that becomes especially important in the context of climate change. The cues for these birds to begin their migration don't necessarily change with a changing climate. And so the availability of those habitats to support them on those journeys can be really drastically impacted. So that's another example of how even though those student data points that we're collecting are just one of over 1 billion, it's still the small piece that adds to the greater thing that's all needed to develop that understanding. And it's made possible with volunteers. There's a small group of staff that put that program together. And I highlight this because at the end of my talk, I will, of course, be pitching that people should come and volunteer for the Eye on Nature program. The very last thing of our programming that I'll mention that Nisqually River Education Project does is our tree planting and invasive species removal. To date, we've had students plant over 100,000 trees. Just this last year, we brought 1,000 students out who planted about 2,000 trees. And in some ways, you can hear that and go, wait a second, how could 1,000 kids only plant 2,000 trees? And that's largely because we spend a lot of time focusing with kids on quality over quantity. We want them to learn about what it takes for a tree to survive that's being planted, and then to spend time planting a tree in a way that we can walk away and not say, oh, we had a giant competition and said our class planted 500 trees. But instead, you can walk away and say, our class planted 30 trees. And we're going to come back to that spot in 10 years. And we're probably going to see 20 of those trees there. And in the areas that we're planting, it's a joy to see students get out and for many of them truly work for the first time, to hold a shovel, to get dirt under their fingernails, and the amount of pride that we watch them take in that, and how careful they are and how seriously they take the task of planting trees is a really big joy for me. We talk to kids about how we plant trees not for trees' sake, but that this is part of salmon recovery, that all the areas where we're planting are really right next to or nearby salmon-bearing waterways. And this is part of that coordinated effort of the tribe's Department of Natural Resources and the Nisqually River Council to think about, how do we do salmon recovery? How do we bring back an animal who its home spans really thousands of miles, right? We have to take care of the places that are its home all the way through its life journey. And so for school kids, getting out to these streams and getting out next to the river to be able to plant properties that the Nisqually Land Trust has purchased is a huge way for them to get involved in that stewardship. Kids, I think I mentioned that they get really proud of their work. I always like sharing this picture because I just remember being out with these two young boys who were very, very proud, and it came through in the photo of them. And we ask kids at the end of each year, most students that participate with us don't just do one field experience. We don't want it to be like, hi, we're Nisqually River Education Project. You can do a field trip with us. We want students to come out and participate in community science and participate in tree planting and stewardship and go toss some salmon and start to see that there's a thread that weaves that story all together. And that's that we're a big community that can figure out a lot of ways to take care of salmon. And so at the end of the year, we ask kids, just, what did you learn doing all of this with us? You went on all these field trips. We came to your class a bunch to get you ready for them. What'd you learn from it? And so I'll maybe actually won't talk during this part, but I'll share a few things that last year students wrote down in that little form that we gave them when we just asked them. And I picked these because we're science educators and we love to teach science concepts. But I also love when I can see that kids are demonstrating something where you need to know the science to get there, but it also shows something more. It starts showing them piecing together how they fit into this picture. And so that's what I had to share this evening. Um, the last thing I'll say is that this is, nothing is accomplished alone. And we're always out there saying, hey, who wants to come help us? So the next thing that we're on to say, hey, who wants to come help us, is to volunteer leading small groups of 5 to 7 students during our Eye on Nature program. We have 2 volunteer trainings coming up. This is something that you can pick one or the other. One is on Wednesday, March 27th. The other is on Tuesday, April 2nd. They're both from 10 to 2. And we have on all of our social media, on our Facebook and our Instagram, information on how to RSVP to those trainings. We would love to see folks that have been so gracious to come and listen to me tonight. If you have time and availability and would like to come out and see more about that program, we'd love to have you. And it's fun work to get to be out with kids. For me, I know I got into this line of work a lot. It took me years to figure this out, but I realized over time that it was because I had a grandma that would take me on walks in the woods. And I think for a lot of kids, if they don't have that person in their life that just takes them outside and shows them things and lets them explore, that we can be a stopgap as environmental educators to know that, hey, that kid that doesn't have that person in their life, they're at least while they're at school, there's going to be someone from the community that takes them on a walk. And I think the Eye on Nature program is a great chance to do that, where there's lots of science learning. We've got a set program. And at the end of the day, it's really about kids getting to go on a walk with someone who's really excited about nature and cares about them and wants to show them that the world is really big and amazing. So I think I will leave it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Davy. That was amazing to see. Oh, so many good ways to get kids outdoors and actually participating in science. So if anyone has any questions for Davy, you can type it into the Q&A. I will get things started. I've got a question for you that I want to make sure is getting across, is that not just anyone can toss salmon into a river, correct?
Yes. So yes, the salmon tossing program is not that we're just grabbing salmon and throwing them out there. Thank you. That's a great clarification. So we actually coordinate how many salmon we're tossing, where we're tossing them with the biologists at the tribe. And we actually there's basically everywhere where there are salmon, there are biologists that are out there monitoring. So many years, if there's an overlap with their surveys that they're doing, we actually go and we clip the tails off of the fish to actually mark the fish that are tossed, because we want to make sure that those fish are really clear to anyone that would be doing a survey, that they didn't get there naturally. So they have to account, like they'll actually go and they track salmon carcasses that are on these waterways outside of the program that we're doing. So we have to have very close coordination. Everything is done in a way that we have to ensure that we're not potentially spreading any disease. Like I mentioned, we're freezing them beforehand. But we're certainly not the only organization that engages in that work. So there are multiple organizations. We're the only ones doing it in the Nisqually watershed. And I mentioned that we do it with kids, but we also do them as community events, usually 1 or 2 each winter. And so we'll be sure that's also another place on our social media through our adult education program called the Nisqually Stream Stewards. Definitely, if you're someone that is interested in coming and checking out some of these activities that we do, that's another option for getting involved. If you don't have a kid that's doing a field trip with us, you can just come do a field trip as a grown-up.
Always fun. Always encourage people to do that. Well, we've got some questions rolling in. Someone says that they love your emphasis on how salmon as carcasses can help riparian trees grow, either indirectly through wildlife transport. But what about LWD placements to jumpstart fish cover restorations where the riparian zone isn't intact?
Yeah, so we haven't done any large woody debris placements. I know that with the like as a student stewardship activity, I know that the land trust has been involved in some of their restoration activities in placing like engineered log jams. So I guess on like a little bit of a bigger scale, that ends up being pretty big projects where they're bringing in heavy equipment. They're driving in pretty substantial logs that'll actually go 30, 40 feet in the ground to modify degraded stream habitat to make it more suitable for salmon. And then the other piece more recently that both the biologists here and then also the land trust have been looking at is this is I guess sort of tangential, but still really cool. Hopefully, the doing beaver analogs. So areas where restoration is happening, some of the thought has been around the fact that beavers historically would have been in these places um, way more with a much greater deal of frequency. And oftentimes, beavers, once a dam is in place, like other beavers will come and be like, oh, I guess this place is great. So there's some work being done to start actually installing like human-made beaver dams and then having that be the thing to sort of, I guess, tell the beavers, like, come on over, the water's fine. So it'll be exciting to follow that project.
That's amazing. Tempting beavers with, look at this dam, you want to make one too? Another question relating to the salmon. Where again do the frozen salmon come from? Are they farmed or are they wild?
The frozen salmon are hatchery. So those are coming from the Kalama Creek hatchery and the Clear Creek hatchery. Both of those are hatcheries that are operated by the Nisqually Indian tribe, and the fish get processed there. So those are fish that the returning fish coming to the hatchery were basically made at the hatchery. They are coming back years later, and then the crew that works there, when they process them, they're basically taking the fish, they compress them down, they bring them into almost like a big concrete swimming pool. They use a fence structure to kind of bring them all in close to where the workers are. They separate them out by sex, they process them. So they are cutting them open, taking the eggs out of the females, taking the milk from the males. That all gets brought up to a facility where they really carefully fertilize those eggs and then raise them. But then, so those fish that they just cut open and took the eggs and the milk from, those are the fish we're tossing. So those are the fish, the carcasses are taken and frozen. And then I guess some of those fish, not all of them, some of those are frozen, then we take them out. Many of the other fish get buried. And I know the one of the projects that's really cool that's kind of getting off of the ground is that the tribe is starting a composting program where the goal is to take more of the carcasses, include those in compost that then goes to the tribe's community garden, and then that will grow food that is then given out to tribal members and particularly elders.
What a great way to use those fish. Another question relating to Eye on Nature. Is it a year-round volunteer program or is it seasonally?
That's a great question. That Ion Nature program is seasonal. Um, and if someone is interested in year-round environmental education programming, um, I'm sure myself and Clarissa and everybody at the estuary would be like, yeah, come over and talk to us. And then the other thing I would mention is we do those trips at the wildlife refuge, and they do year-round programming outside of Ion Nature. And so if it's something that, if it was a particular interest to someone who's like, oh, I really have a connection with that wildlife refuge, that would be something to talk with their education staff there, because they're doing lots of field trips all year round.
Great. Anyone else have any questions for Davy? Otherwise, I have another one. What was your favorite experience that you've had with kids in nature?
Um, I'm gonna go with one that is it was just really scary and exciting. This year, um, it was the third time that I've been leading kids on a walk and had a tree fall really close to us. And the after the first and the second time, and really especially at this third time, it just every time it's been great because we have been just far enough away that it's totally safe. But I just felt so privileged. I was like, man, how lucky is a job do I get to be out in nature so much with kids that I've gotten to watch three trees fall? So that, yeah, that would be my answer to that.
Is that lucky or unlucky?
Well, as long as they're far enough away from us, then it'll be unlucky if they get too close for comfort.
Did you get to explore it afterwards?
They all, my safety mindedness kicked in. So they all wanted to, but I was just like, nope, we're not going anywhere near there. If one came down, I don't know if it's an issue with the soil or whatever, or it hit something on the way down that could be coming down in the next 5 minutes. So I was a little bit of a party pooper.
I guess safety is better than exploring.
Larissa, do we get to see your or did anyone color the coloring page?
Yeah, if anyone colored their salmon,
So
here's mine. We love to see your coloring pages. If you did them, you can send them in to the estuarium's email or post them on social and tag us. But yeah, wow. Thank you everyone for joining, especially Davy for taking time out of your night to teach us and share about what you're doing at Nisqually River Education. We have a
absolutely for having me.
We have a participant giving us some advice about best to avoid being in the woods when wind speeds average between 20 miles per hour, in contrast to 10 miles per hour that keeps flags waving. So check your
Ooh,
wind
I like
speeds
that.
before going out in the forest.
Thank you for that.